My son didn't raise his voice when he said it. That was the worst part. He just slid the pen across the table, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "Sign it, or you can leave tonight." The room went quiet. Crystal glasses, warm lighting, smiling guests. Everything felt like a performance I hadn't agreed to be in. Lauren stood behind him, arms crossed, already certain of the ending. I looked at the papers, then at my son. And I smiled, because what they didn't understand was this. I wasn't about to lose everything. I was about to take it back. If you've ever been put in a position where love felt like a transaction, I want to hear your story. Where are you watching from, and what would you have done in my place? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Sometimes the quietest moments carry the loudest truths. My name is Christine Ellis. I'm 67 years old, and until 3 years ago, I thought I understood exactly what kind of life I had built and who I had built it for. My husband Robert used to say that a good life wasn't measured by what you kept, but by what you were able to give without losing yourself. Back then, I believed we had done both. We built something from nothing, a modest but steady business supplying commercial kitchen equipment to restaurants across South Carolina. Nothing glamorous but honest work. Long hours, early mornings, hands that stayed rough no matter how many years passed. We raised our son Jason in the middle of all that. He grew up in the back office doing homework on old invoices, falling asleep to the hum of warehouse fans. He wasn't spoiled. We couldn't afford that. But he was loved. And more importantly, he was included. Robert made sure of that. He needs to know what things cost, he'd say, not just money effort. For a long time, Jason understood. He was a good boy, thoughtful, protective. The kind of son who would fix the porch light before I even noticed it had burned out. When Robert got sick those final months that felt both endless and too short, Jason was there every day, sitting by his father's bed, holding his hand, promising things I believed he meant. "Don't worry, Dad," he said once. His voice breaking, "I'll take care of Mom." I held on to that sentence longer than I should have. After Robert passed, the house became too quiet. Not just empty quiet in a way that pressed against your ears. I tried to stay busy. The business still needed attention, though I had stepped back from daily operations years before. Jason took on more responsibility. At first, I was proud of him. Watching him step into his father's role felt like watching something continue instead of end. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. It wasn't sudden. That's the thing about these changes, they rarely are. They creep in through small moments you excuse at the time. It started with little things. Jason stopped asking for advice. Then he stopped telling me about decisions altogether. He began using words that didn't sound like him leverage image positioning. He cared more about how things looked than how they worked. And then there was Lauren. I remember the first time I met her. She was beautiful, polished in a way I never had been, confident. She walked into the room like she already knew she belonged there and expected everyone else to agree. At first I thought that might be good for Jason. Balance him out, push him forward, and for a while everything seemed fine. They married within a year. The wedding was elegant, expensive in ways that made me quietly uncomfortable. But I didn't say anything. I told myself this was their life, their choices. That became a habit. When Jason called asking for help with credit card debt shortly after the wedding, I wired the money the same day. No questions. When they wanted to renovate their house, open kitchen imported fixtures, things Robert would have called unnecessary, I contributed more than I should have. Just until things stabilize. Jason told me. I believed him. Then came the business troubles. A risky expansion into high-end showroom design that didn't go as planned. Contracts fell through. Costs piled up. Jason sat across from me at my kitchen table, rubbing his temples like the weight of the world had landed squarely on his shoulders. "I just need a little help getting through this," he said. And I gave it. Because that's what mothers do, right? We step in before the fall becomes permanent. We cushion the blow. We convince ourselves that support is the same thing as love. But something strange happens when help becomes expected instead of appreciated. The thank yous grew shorter. The visits less frequent. Conversations turned transactional. I began to feel like a resource instead of a person. Still, I told myself it was temporary, until the night I realized it wasn't. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had just come back from volunteering at the church kitchen. My legs were tired and I wasn't paying attention as I carried a basket of laundry down the stairs. I missed a step. It wasn't a dramatic fall, just enough to send me sitting hard on the landing, more shaken than hurt. Jason insisted I come stay with them after that. "It's not safe for you to be alone," he said. "At least for a little while," Lauren agreed quickly. Too quickly maybe, but I didn't question it. I was touched, if I'm being honest. I thought this is what family does. We show up for each other. So I packed a suitcase. Told myself it was temporary. The first week wasn't bad. They gave me the guest room. Lauren made a point of asking what I liked for breakfast. Jason checked in before leaving for work. It felt manageable. But then the edges started to show. Lauren began rearranging things small at first, moving my belongings out of shared spaces, suggesting I spend more time in my room when they had guests. "It's just easier," she'd say with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Jason started getting impatient. Not overtly, just less patient. If I asked a question, he'd answer quickly, distracted. If I mentioned Robert, the conversation would shift almost immediately. "We should focus on the present, Mom," he told me once. The present. It didn't feel like something I recognized anymore. I started noticing how often Lauren whispered to Jason in the kitchen. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Glances exchanged over my shoulder. It wasn't hostility exactly. It was something colder. Calculation. And then there were the words I wasn't meant to hear. One afternoon, I was walking down the hallway when I caught Lauren's voice from the office. "She just needs to sign," she said. Jason responded lower, harder to make out. "But I heard enough. We can't keep waiting." I stood there longer than I should have, my hand resting against the wall for balance, not because I was going to fall, but because something inside me already had. I told myself I must have misunderstood, but doubt has a way of planting itself deep, and once it's there, everything else starts to look different. A few days later, the confirmation came. It arrived in the form of a plain white envelope. No special marking, no urgency, just another piece of mail sitting on the kitchen counter. But it had my name on it, printed clearly, unmistakably. I picked it up without thinking, and that small, simple action would change everything. I didn't open the envelope right away. For a moment, I just stood there in the kitchen, holding it between my fingers, feeling the weight of something I couldn't yet name. The house was quiet, too quiet. Jason had already left for work, and Lauren was upstairs on a call. I could hear the faint rhythm of her voice through the ceiling, steady and controlled like everything about her. I turned the envelope over. It wasn't handwritten. It was printed professional. The kind of correspondence you don't accidentally send to the wrong person. My name was there. My address had been updated to Jason's house, which meant someone had changed it. I don't know why that detail unsettled me more than anything else, but it did. Because it wasn't just about receiving mail, it was about being redirected, managed. I slid my finger under the flap and opened it slowly. Inside were several neatly stapled pages. The letterhead at the top read, Ellis Family Trust, Administrative Notice. My breath caught. Robert had set up the trust years ago. I remembered the day we signed the original documents. He had insisted on it even when I said we didn't have enough wealth to justify something so formal. It's not about how much he told me, it's about how it's handled. At the time, I thought it was just another one of his cautious habits. Now, standing in my son's kitchen reading a notice I had never authorized, I realized how much further ahead he had been thinking. The document in my hands outlined a proposed restructuring of the trust. I read that phrase 3 times. Proposed. Restructuring. Neutral words, harmless on the surface. But as I scanned the pages, my chest tightened. Jason's name appeared again and again, not as a beneficiary, not as a participant, but as something else entirely. Acting authority, oversight control, primary decision maker. I stopped reading for a moment, my vision blurring. That wasn't right. That wasn't how Robert had designed it. When we finalized the trust, he made one thing very clear. While Jason would eventually inherit, I remained the controlling authority as long as I was alive and mentally capable. It was meant to protect me, to ensure I couldn't be pushed aside. And yet here it was language that suggested otherwise. Not confirmed, but moving in that direction. I flipped to the last page. There it was. A scheduled meeting. Review and signature confirmation appointment date 2 weeks from now. My name was listed as the required signing party. My hand began to tremble not from weakness, but from realization. This wasn't a mistake. This was a process, and I hadn't been included in it. I was still staring at the page when I heard Lauren's footsteps on the stairs. I quickly gathered the papers and slipped them back into the envelope, placing it exactly where I had found it on the counter. By the time she walked into the kitchen, I was rinsing a coffee mug like nothing had happened. "Morning," she said lightly, reaching for her phone. "Good morning," I replied, keeping my voice steady. She glanced at the counter briefly, just a flick of her eyes, but it was enough. Enough for me to notice. She saw the envelope. And she knew, but she didn't say anything. Neither did I. That silence told me more than any explanation could have. The rest of the day passed slowly. I went through the motions, folding laundry, tidying up, sitting by the window longer than usual, but my mind stayed fixed on those documents, on the words, on the implications, on the fact that my son was involved in something he hadn't told me about. By late afternoon, I had made a decision. I needed to talk to someone who understood what I didn't. And there was only one person I trusted for that. Michael Turner. He had been Robert's attorney for over 20 years. A careful man, quiet, observant, the kind who spoke less but noticed more. If something was happening with the trust, Michael would know. Or at the very least, he would find out. I didn't want to call from the house. That might sound paranoid, but something inside me had shifted. A line I couldn't quite define had been crossed, and I no longer felt comfortable having certain conversations under that roof. So the next morning, I told Lauren I was going to the church. She smiled, distracted, barely looking up from her tablet. "Of course," she said. "Take your time." That was the first time I noticed it clearly. She wasn't concerned about where I was going. She was confident I wouldn't go anywhere that mattered. That assumption would be her first mistake. I drove across town to a small cafe near Michael's office. Not the main one, the one he used for formal meetings, but a quiet place a few blocks away where people went when they didn't want to be noticed. I called him from the parking lot. "Christine." he answered, a note of surprise in his voice. Is everything all right? I need to see you, I said. Today, if possible. There was a pause. Not hesitation, consideration. Give me 30 minutes, he replied. I'll meet you there. When he walked in, he looked exactly as I remembered. Same measured steps, same calm expression. But the moment he saw my face, something in his eyes sharpened. You found something, he said, sitting down across from me. It wasn't a question. I slid the envelope across the table. I wasn't supposed to, I said quietly. But it came to me anyway. Michael opened it carefully, scanning the contents with practiced efficiency. As he read, his expression didn't change, but his silence did. It grew heavier, more deliberate. When he reached the final page, he set the papers down and looked at me. How long have you been aware of this? He asked. Since yesterday. And has Jason discussed any of it with you? I shook my head. No. Michael exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. Then we have a problem. The words landed softly, but their weight was unmistakable. What kind of problem? I asked. He folded his hands together. The kind where someone is attempting to move authority without proper consent. My stomach tightened. Is that legal? Not the way it's being done here, he replied. At best, it's premature. At worst. He paused, choosing his words carefully. It could be considered coercive if pressure is involved. Coercive. The word echoed in my mind. I thought of the whispers, the glances, the envelope, and suddenly everything aligned in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. They want me to sign, I said. Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied me. Have they asked you yet? He said. Not directly, but they will. It wasn't a question. No, I said quietly. They will. Michael nodded once. Then we need to be very careful about what happens next. A chill ran through me, not from fear, but from clarity. Tell me the truth, I said. How bad is this? He held my gaze. Bad enough that you should not confront them yet. My fingers tightened around my coffee cup. Why not? Because if this is what it looks like, he said, tapping the document lightly, then they believe they're close to getting what they want. And that's a problem. It's an opportunity. I blinked. I don't understand. Michael leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. Christine, if someone is willing to cross a line like this, they rarely stop halfway. They go all the way. My heart began to beat faster, not with panic, but with something sharper. What are you saying? I'm saying, he replied calmly, that if they're going to pressure you, we need to let them do it. Properly. The implications settled in slowly. You want me to wait, I said. I want you to let them reveal exactly how far they're willing to go. I stared at him. And then what? Michael's expression didn't change. Then we make sure it costs them. For the first time since opening that envelope, I didn't feel confused. I felt awake. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind refused to settle. Every conversation, every glance, every small moment I had brushed aside over the past few months came back with sharper edges. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And now, I saw everything. Jason avoiding eye contact when finances came up. Lauren stepping in to answer questions that weren't directed at her. The way certain documents were always handled already. The quiet urgency behind their politeness. It hadn't started recently. It had been building, and I had been accommodating it. That realization hurt more than anything else. because it meant I had helped create the space where this could happen. The next morning, I moved carefully, deliberately. Not in a way that would draw attention, but in a way that would let me observe without being seen as observing. Lauren was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. "Good morning," she said, cheerful in that polished, effortless way of hers. "Morning," I replied. She poured herself coffee, then glanced at me. "You're up early." "I didn't sleep well," I said truthfully. She tilted her head slightly, studying me for a fraction longer than necessary. It was subtle but not invisible. "Everything okay?" she asked. There it was. Not concern. "A test." "I think so," I said, keeping my tone light. "Just thinking about Robert." That answer usually worked. It created enough emotional distance to avoid deeper questions. This time, Lauren's expression shifted just slightly. "We don't want you dwelling too much on the past," she said gently. "It's not good for your stress." I nodded. "Of course." But inside, something hardened. The past was exactly what they were trying to rewrite. Jason came in a few minutes later, adjusting his watch as he checked his phone. He barely looked up when he greeted me. "Morning, Mom." "Morning." He moved quickly. Coffee keys, phone. His attention split between everything except the people in the room. "Big day?" I asked casually. "Always," he said with a faint smile. Lauren stepped closer to him, lowering her voice just enough that I had to listen carefully to catch it. "Did you confirm with Michael's office?" she asked. Jason hesitated. "For what?" He replied. She gave him a look, a small, controlled one. "The review meeting," she said. My heart skipped. So they knew. Or at least they were aware of the timeline. Jason shrugged lightly. "I'll handle it," he said. That phrase again. "I'll handle it." It used to sound reassuring. Now it sounded like control. They left together shortly after the front door closing with a soft click that echoed louder than it should have. I waited a few minutes before moving. Then I went straight to Jason's office. I didn't rush. There was no need. If anything, moving too quickly would have betrayed the calm I needed to maintain. The door was slightly open. Inside, everything was neat, organized, too organized. Jason had never been particularly tidy growing up. Robert used to joke that his version of organization was knowing where everything was, no matter how messy it looked. This was different. This was curated. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. For a moment, I just stood there taking it in. The desk, the shelves, the framed certificates on the wall. Evidence of a life that looked successful from the outside. Then I sat down. I didn't start by searching. I started by thinking, if I were Jason or Lauren, where would I keep something important, not hidden, not locked away, accessible? Because they didn't think I would look. That assumption would be their second mistake. I opened the top drawer. Nothing unusual: pens, notepads, a few business cards. Second drawer. Invoices. Contracts. Standard paperwork. Third drawer. That's where I found it. A folder. Plain. Unlabeled. But thicker than the rest. I pulled it out slowly, placing it on the desk. For a moment, my hand rested on top of it. This was the moment I realized. The one where suspicion becomes certainty. I opened it. Inside were copies of documents. Some I recognized, some I didn't. But what mattered wasn't the volume. It was the consistency. Every page pointed in the same direction, toward control, toward transfer, toward me being removed. There were drafts of the trust restructuring, earlier versions than the one I had received, notes in the margins handwritten. Not mine. Jason's. Accelerate timeline. Need signature before end of quarter. Discuss capacity clause. Capacity. The word made my stomach turn. They weren't just trying to get me to sign. They were preparing to argue that I couldn't refuse. I kept reading. There were emails, printed out conversations between Jason and someone from a financial advisory firm. Discussions about asset management, about streamlining authority, and then one line that stopped me cold. If she hesitates, we proceed with alternative evaluation. Alternative evaluation. I didn't need Michael to explain what that meant. They were ready to question my mental competence, to turn hesitation into evidence, to turn resistance into weakness. I closed my eyes briefly, not in shock, in understanding. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't pressure born out of desperation. This was a plan, carefully built, patiently executed, and I had been standing in the middle of it believing I was still part of the family. I gathered the documents, placing them back exactly as I had found them, every page aligned, every corner straight. When I closed the drawer, my hands were steady, because something inside me had changed. The confusion was gone. So was the doubt. All that remained was clarity. And clarity, I realized, is a dangerous thing to underestimate. That afternoon, I sat in the living room, a book open in my lap that I didn't read. I was waiting. Not for Jason, not for Lauren, for the next move. Because now I understood something Michael had said. They go all the way. And if that was true, then they wouldn't wait long. They couldn't afford to. The door opened just after 6. Lauren walked in first, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. Jason followed, already loosening his tie. "Hi," she said brightly, spotting me on the couch. "How was your day?" "Quiet," I replied. She smiled. "Good." Jason glanced at me briefly. "We're having a few people over this weekend," he said. "Nothing big. Just dinner." I nodded slowly. "That sounds nice." Lauren stepped in smoothly. "It'll be a good opportunity to catch up with some friends," she added, "and go over a few things." There it was again. That phrase, go over a few things. I met her eyes. "I'm sure it will be," I said calmly. She held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then she smiled. But this time, I saw it clearly. Not warmth, not kindness. Confidence. The kind that comes from believing you're already in control. What she didn't realize was that control only works when the other person doesn't see it. And now I did. Completely. The dinner wasn't just a dinner, it was a setup, a stage, a moment they had been building toward. And this time, I would be ready for it. I met Michael 2 days later, not in his office, but in a place that felt deliberately removed from everything Jason and Lauren could touch. It was a small chapel just outside Charleston. Whitewood, slightly weathered, the kind of place Robert and I used to stop by on quiet Sunday afternoons when we didn't feel like sitting through a full service. There was a stillness there that made people lower their voices without thinking. Michael was already inside when I arrived, seated in the second pew, a folder resting on his lap. He stood when he saw me. "Christine." "Michael." We didn't shake hands. It didn't feel necessary. We sat down side by side, both facing forward for a moment, as if we were there for prayer rather than strategy. "I went through the documents you showed me," he said quietly. "I found more," I replied. That got his attention. I handed him the notes I had written from memory, the phrases, the markings, the references to capacity evaluation. I didn't dare take anything physical from Jason's office, but I had copied enough in my mind to reconstruct the intent. Michael read without interruption. When he finished, he closed the folder slowly. "That confirms it," he said. I exhaled, though I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath. "So there's no misunderstanding?" "No," he said firmly. "There isn't." The words settled between us like a final verdict. For a moment I thought about Jason, the boy who used to sit at this very chapel beside me, swinging his legs because they didn't quite reach the floor yet. The boy who promised his father he would take care of me. And I let that memory pass, because the man he had become had made his choice. "What do we do?" I asked. Michael leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. "We let them proceed." I turned to him. "You said that before," I replied. "I need to understand exactly what that means." He nodded. "Christine, the trust Robert created includes protective provisions, strong ones. But those provisions don't activate based on suspicion. They require evidence. Evidence of coercion." "Exactly." I stared at the front of the chapel, at the simple wooden cross mounted on the wall. "And if they don't push that far?" I asked quietly. Michael didn't hesitate. "They will." There was no doubt in his voice, no speculation, just certainty. "People who plan this much don't stop halfway," he continued. "They've already moved too many pieces. They're committed." A chill ran through me, not fear, but recognition. I had seen that same determination in Jason before, just never directed at me. "So we wait for them to ask me to sign," I said. "Yes." And then Michael turned toward me, his gaze steady. "Then we make sure it happens under conditions that expose exactly what they're doing." I frowned slightly. "What kind of conditions, witnesses?" he said simply. "Context. Pressure." I understood immediately. "The dinner," I said. He gave a small nod. "They've already chosen the setting for you." A strange feeling settled in my chest. Not panic, not even anger. Something colder. "They think they're controlling the scene," I murmured. "They think they're protecting themselves," Michael corrected. "Public setting. Polite language. No visible force. But the pressure is still there." "Exactly." I looked down at my hands resting quietly in my lap. "And that's enough." "It can be," he said. "If it's clear. If it's undeniable." Silence stretched between us for a moment. Then I asked the question that had been building since I opened that first envelope. "What happens to Jason if we prove it?" Michael didn't answer right away. Instead, he chose his words carefully. "The trust includes a clause Robert insisted on," he said. "In the event that any beneficiary attempts to gain control through coercion, fraud, or manipulation of the primary holder, meaning you their access to the trust, is immediately suspended." "Suspended," I repeated. "Frozen. Pending review." My throat tightened. "And after that, if the behavior is confirmed." He paused briefly. "Their share can be permanently revoked." The words hit harder than I expected, not because I didn't understand the legal side, but because I did. Completely. "That would mean," I began. "It would mean Jason loses his inheritance," Michael said quietly. The chapel felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. "That's not what I wanted," I said almost to myself. I know he replied, "And yet—" I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. Michael leaned forward slightly, his voice softer now. "Christine, this isn't about punishment. It's about protection. Robert designed this to protect you and to protect what the trust was meant for." "Sophie," I said. "Yes, my granddaughter. The one person in that house who still looked at me like I belonged." "What about her?" I asked. "Does this affect her?" Michael shook his head. No. In fact, it strengthens her position. If Jason's access is restricted, the trust reallocates a portion directly to her future education, living support, things like that. I closed my eyes briefly. Robert had thought of everything. Even this. Even the possibility that our own son might need to be stopped. When did he add that clause? I asked quietly. Michael hesitated. About a year before he passed. That surprised me. He never told me. He didn't want to worry you, Michael said. But he had concerns about Jason. Around Jason, he corrected gently. Not necessarily about his character, more about his vulnerability to influence. Michael nodded. And Lauren? I asked. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. She wasn't mentioned directly, he said, but the timing suggests she was part of what Robert was observing. I let out a slow breath. So he saw this coming? I said. He saw the possibility, Michael replied, and he made sure there was a safeguard. I opened my eyes and looked straight ahead again, at the cross, at the quiet stillness of the room, at the weight of everything I now understood. And you're telling me, I said slowly, that the only way to activate that safeguard is to let my own son cross the line. Michael didn't flinch. Yes. The word echoed. I swallowed. That feels like setting a trap. It's not a trap, he said calmly. It's a boundary, one they're choosing to cross. I sat with that for a moment, because deep down I knew he was right. This wasn't something I was creating. It was something I was finally refusing to ignore. What do I need to do? I asked. Michael reached into his folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Nothing complicated, he said. When the time comes, you remain calm. You don't argue. You don't refuse outright. I raised an eyebrow. I don't. No, he said. You engage. You ask questions. You let them explain. And most importantly, he slid the paper toward me. You sign. I looked at him sharply. You want me to sign it? Yes. My heart skipped. That's what they want. And that's exactly why it works, he said. I stared at the paper. But wouldn't that give them control? Not if it's done correctly. I looked back at him, searching his face. What do you mean? Michael's voice lowered slightly. It's not just about the signature. It's about the circumstances surrounding it. I leaned in. Christine, if you sign under visible pressure, if it's clear that the agreement is being presented as an ultimatum, then that signature becomes evidence. Understanding dawned slowly. They think the signature protects them, I said, and in reality, he replied, it exposes them. A strange sensation spread through me. Not satisfaction, not revenge. Something steadier. Resolve. And after I signed, I asked. Michael's expression was calm. Then we act. I nodded slowly, absorbing every word. Outside, I could hear the faint rustle of wind through the trees. The world continued quiet and indifferent, while inside that chapel, something in my life had shifted permanently. I stood up. Michael followed. Are you sure about this? He asked. I thought about Jason, about Lauren, about the dinner they were planning, about the pen that would be placed in front of me, and about the version of myself they believed would pick it up without question. Yes, I said. My voice didn't shake. I am. Because for the first time since Robert died, I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was ready. The house felt different after that meeting. Not louder, not more hostile, just clearer. It was as if someone had turned on a light I didn't know had been off. Every movement, every word, every silence between Jason and Lauren now carried meaning I could finally understand. And once you understand something, you stop excusing it. That was the shift. I moved through the next 2 days carefully, not because I was afraid of being caught, but because I didn't want them to sense the change in me. Michael had been clear about that. They need to believe you're still uncertain, he'd said, still hesitant. That's what will push them. So I played the part. I asked small questions, harmless ones. Will there be many people at dinner? Should I help prepare anything? What exactly do you want to go over? Lauren handled most of those answers. Oh, nothing complicated, she said lightly. Just a few updates, really. We want everything to be organized. Organized. That word again. Jason barely engaged in those conversations. When he did, it was brief, distant. It's just paperwork, Mom, he said once, not even looking up from his phone. I nodded. Of course. But I watched him, and what I saw wasn't confidence, it was tension. Subtle, but there. The kind that shows up in tight shoulders and rushed movements in the way someone avoids stillness because stillness gives them time to think. Jason wasn't comfortable, which meant this wasn't as easy for him as Lauren wanted it to be. That mattered, not because it excused anything, but because it told me something important. He still knew somewhere beneath everything that this was wrong. The morning of the dinner, I woke up before sunrise. Not from anxiety, from clarity. I sat by the window in the guest room, watching the sky slowly shift from dark to pale blue, and I allowed myself one quiet moment to feel everything I had been holding back. The grief, the betrayal, the disbelief that it had come to this. Not just the situation, but the fact that it was my own son standing on the other side of it. I let those feelings pass through me without resistance, and then I let them go, because I couldn't carry them into that evening. What I needed now wasn't emotion. It was control. By mid-morning, the house was already in motion. Lauren had hired a catering service. People moved in and out with trays, floral arrangements, polished servingware. The dining room was transformed into something out of a magazine, perfect, curated, staged. Exactly what she wanted. A setting that suggested harmony, even if none existed. She directed everything with precision, her voice calm but firm. No, the centerpiece goes here. Make sure the glasses are evenly spaced. We want it to feel intimate but elevated. I watched her from the hallway for a moment. She was in her element. This was her strength, not just presentation, but control through presentation. Everything looked right, which meant no one would question what felt wrong. That I realized was the entire strategy. Jason spent most of the afternoon in his office. The door closed. The same door I had stood behind days earlier reading the truth he thought I'd never see. At one point I passed by and heard his voice inside, low, strained. I know, he said. I'll handle it tonight. Silence followed. Then, no, she won't refuse. A pause. I said, I'll take care of it. I kept walking. Because now I understood something else. This wasn't just pressure from Lauren. Jason had committed to this outcome. He had promised it, which meant tonight wasn't just about convincing me. It was about fulfilling something he had already set in motion. By late afternoon, Sophie came home from school. She walked in quietly, her backpack slipping off one shoulder as she stepped into the hallway. Hi, Grandma, she said softly when she saw me. Hi, sweetheart. There was something different about her, too. Not fear, awareness. Children notice more than we think they do. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer. Are you okay? She asked. The question caught me off guard not because of what it meant, but because of how gently she asked it. I smiled. I'm all right. She studied my face as if trying to decide whether to believe me. Then she nodded slowly. Okay. But she didn't move away. Instead, she lowered her voice. I heard Mom and Dad talking last night. My chest tightened slightly. What did you hear? I asked carefully. Sophie glanced toward the kitchen, then back at me. They said, if you don't sign, things are going to get complicated. There it was. Plain. Unfiltered. The truth spoken without the layers adults use to soften it. I placed a hand gently on her arm. Thank you for telling me, I said. She nodded again, then looked down. I don't think it's fair, she added quietly. Neither did I. But fairness wasn't what we were dealing with anymore. This was something else. Something colder, Sophie, I said softly. No matter what happens tonight, I want you to remember something. She looked up at me. You didn't do anything wrong. Her eyes filled slightly, but she didn't cry. She just nodded. I know. And for a moment, that was enough. By early evening, the house was ready, candles lit, table set, soft music playing in the background. Everything exactly as Lauren had envisioned it. Guests began arriving just after 6. First, a couple Jason had done business with, well-dressed, polite, observant. Then Chloe, Lauren's sister, with her usual confident energy and quick smile. And finally, a man I recognized from church, the pastor Lauren had recently started inviting to events like this. That detail didn't escape me. A moral witness, someone whose presence suggested legitimacy, even righteousness. It was carefully constructed. Every piece, every person, all placed to support the same narrative, that this was normal, that this was appropriate, that this was somehow in my best interest. I greeted each guest warmly, smiled, thanked them for coming, played my role, because tonight wasn't about resisting, it was about revealing. Dinner began smoothly, conversation flowed, laughter came easily, wine was poured, plates were passed, and for a brief moment, anyone looking in from the outside would have seen exactly what Lauren wanted them to see: a successful family, a harmonious evening, a mother surrounded by people who cared about her. But underneath it, something else was building. I could feel it. In the pauses between conversations, in the way Jason checked the time more often than usual, in the way Lauren's eyes flicked toward him every few minutes, silently coordinating. They were waiting for the right moment, and I was ready for it. The plates were cleared, dessert was served, coffee poured, and then it happened. Jason set his cup down slowly, cleared his throat, and reached for something beside him. The folder. The same one I had seen in his office. He placed it on the table between us. Lauren's posture straightened almost imperceptibly. The room grew quieter, not silent, but focused. This was it. Jason looked at me. Really looked this time. Mom. He began, his voice steady but not entirely. There's something we need to go over. I met his gaze, and for the first time that evening, I didn't pretend not to understand. I simply nodded. All right, I said calmly. Let's go over it. The moment Jason placed the folder on the table, the entire room shifted. Not visibly. No one gasped. No one spoke out of turn, but something in the air tightened. Conversations faded into a polite silence. Even the soft music in the background seemed to recede, as if the house itself understood that something irreversible was about to happen. Jason opened the folder slowly. He didn't rush. He wanted this to feel controlled, deliberate, Lauren leaned slightly forward beside him, her expression composed, almost reassuring, like this was just another thoughtful family discussion. But I could see it now. The tension behind her eyes. The expectation. This wasn't a conversation. It was a conclusion they had already decided on. Mom. Jason began again, his voice measured. We've been reviewing some things, financially, legally, just to make sure everything is structured in the best possible way moving forward. I nodded lightly. That sounds responsible, I said. Lauren smiled at that, quick and satisfied. Yes, exactly, she added. We just want to make sure you're protected, that everything is simplified. Simplified. There was that word again. I looked down at the papers Jason slid toward me, neatly organized, clearly labeled, prepared. I didn't touch them right away. Instead, I glanced around the table. The guests were watching not openly, not intrusively, but enough. Enough to witness, enough to validate whatever happened next. The pastor sat quietly, hands folded, observing. Jason's business associates leaned back slightly in their chairs, alert, but careful not to interfere. Chloe sipped her wine, her expression unreadable. Everyone present had been chosen for a reason, and now they were part of it. I placed my hands gently on the table. Would you like me to read it? I asked. Jason hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. Yes. Of course. I pulled the documents closer. Page by page, I moved through them slowly. Not because I needed to understand they had made their intentions clear days ago, but because the act of reading mattered. It created time. It created space. And most importantly, it created visibility. I let my eyes linger on certain phrases just long enough for anyone watching to notice. Transfer of residential authority, reassignment of financial oversight, declaration of supportive guardianship in the event of diminished capacity. I paused, lifted my eyes. Diminished capacity, I repeated softly. Lauren leaned in slightly, her tone warm. It's just standard language, she said. Nothing to worry about. Standard. I held her gaze for a moment, then returned to the page. Jason shifted in his seat. Mom, it's really just about making things easier, he said. You don't need to handle all this anymore. We can take care of it for you. I nodded slowly. I see. But I didn't sign. Not yet. I turned another page. Relinquishment of primary residence rights. I read aloud. The words hung in the air. Jason cleared his throat. That's just in case we need to make adjustments to the living situation, he said. In case, I asked. Lauren answered this time. Yes. Well, yes. We just want flexibility. You know, for your comfort. My comfort. I let that settle for a moment. Then I placed the papers down gently. And if I don't sign, I asked. The question was simple, but it changed everything. Jason's jaw tightened. Lauren's smile didn't falter, but it didn't deepen either. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Jason leaned forward slightly, his voice lower now. Firmer. Mom, we've already discussed this, he said. I tilted my head. Have we? A flicker of irritation crossed his face. We need to move forward with this, he continued. It's the best option. For who I asked quietly. The room stilled. Not dramatically, just enough. Lauren placed a hand lightly on Jason's arm. Christine, she said, her tone carefully measured, this isn't about taking anything away from you. It's about protecting you and the family. The family. I looked at her, then at Jason, then back at the papers. And if I choose not to, I asked again. This time Jason didn't hesitate. He leaned back slightly, exhaled once, and then he said it. Clear, direct, without disguise. Then you'll have to find somewhere else to stay. The words landed like a weight dropped onto the table. No softness, no explanation, just truth. For a moment, no one moved. The pastor shifted slightly in his seat. One of the guests looked down at his plate. Chloe's expression sharpened interest, replacing neutrality, and Lauren didn't speak, because she didn't need to. This was the moment they had been working toward. The ultimatum, the pressure, the line. I looked at my son, really looked at him, at the man sitting across from me, the one who once promised to take care of me. And I saw it. Not confusion, not conflict, decision. He had already crossed the line. He just needed me to follow. I let a small silence settle between us. Not awkward, not tense, intentional. Then I asked one final question. You're asking me to sign these papers, or leave, tonight? Jason met my gaze. Yes, there it was, clear, undeniable, witnessed. I felt something inside me shift, but not break. Not this time. Because I had already done my grieving. Now, I was ready. I reached forward slowly, my fingers resting lightly on the edge of the document. Lauren exhaled just slightly. Jason watched me closely, waiting, expecting, certain. I picked up the pen, held it between my fingers, turned it once, twice. Then I looked up, and I smiled. Not warmly, not bitterly, calmly. Because in that moment I understood something they didn't. They thought this was the end of the conversation. The moment where everything transferred, where control shifted, where I lost. But what they didn't understand was this. This was the moment everything began to unravel, and they had just made sure there were witnesses. I suppose I said softly, my voice steady, if those are my only two options. I lowered the pen to the paper and began to sign my name. Slowly, carefully, deliberately. Christine Ellis. The ink flowed smoothly across the page. Final, visible, unmistakable. Then, just as Michael had instructed, I added one more thing, a small line beneath my signature. The date, the exact time, and a single sentence. Short, clear, impossible to ignore. I set the pen down and looked up. Thank you, I said, my voice carrying just enough to reach everyone at the table. I needed you all to hear that. The silence that followed was no longer controlled. For a second, no one moved. The kind of silence that followed my words wasn't polite anymore. It wasn't the quiet of people waiting their turn to speak. It was the quiet of people realizing something had just shifted, and they weren't sure in whose favor. Jason frowned. What do you mean by that? He asked, his voice tight. Lauren's posture stiffened beside him, her fingers curling slightly against the edge of the table. She hadn't expected that line. I could see it clearly now. Good. I folded my hands calmly in front of me. I mean, I said gently, that it's important to have clarity, especially when decisions like this are being made. Jason's eyes flicked down to the paper, then back to me. You signed it, he said. So, we're clear. I held his gaze. Yes, I replied. I did. And then I let the silence stretch just long enough for discomfort to settle deeper into the room. One of the guests shifted in his chair. The pastor cleared his throat quietly. Lauren leaned forward slightly, her voice controlled but edged now. Christine, I'm not sure what you're trying to imply, but everything here has been completely transparent. Transparent. I almost smiled at the word. Instead, I tilted my head slightly. Has it? I asked. Jason exhaled sharply. Mom. What is this? He said. If you had concerns, you should have brought them up before signing. That's exactly what I did, I said softly. His brow furrowed. No, you didn't. I glanced down at the document, then back at him. I read every page I said, out loud. Another pause. This one sharper. Because now they were beginning to understand that I hadn't just signed. I had performed, and so had they. Lauren's eyes narrowed slightly. This is unnecessary, she said. The paperwork is done. We can discuss any misunderstandings privately. Privately. Of course. I shook my head gently. I don't think that would be appropriate, I replied. Jason's patience snapped just a little. Appropriate for what he demanded. For what just happened, I said. The words landed differently this time. He leaned forward. Nothing happened, he said. You agreed. You signed. I let out a small breath. No, I said calmly. You told me to sign or leave. The sentence hung in the air like a weight no one could move. Jason froze. Lauren's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Across the table, one of the guests shifted again, this time more noticeably. The pastor's expression tightened, his hands now clasped more firmly together, because now it was no longer ambiguous. It was no longer framed as concern. It was exactly what it had been, an ultimatum. Lauren recovered first. That's not what he meant, she said quickly. You're taking it out of context. I turned to her. Then what did he mean, I asked. She hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Jason ran a hand through his hair, his composure slipping. Mom, you're making this into something it's not, he said. We're trying to help you. By asking me to give up my home? I asked. It's not about the house or my financial authority. It's about management or my legal capacity. That one landed harder. Jason stopped talking. Lauren's face tightened. I leaned back slightly in my chair, still calm, still controlled, because I wasn't arguing. I was clarifying, and every word they said now only made that clarity sharper. I'm just trying to understand, I said softly. You've both been very careful with your wording tonight. I'd like to make sure I'm hearing it correctly. No one spoke. The guests were no longer pretending not to listen. They were watching, evaluating, reconsidering, exactly as Michael had said they would. Lauren straightened her posture, her voice lower, now more deliberate. Christine, she said, this conversation is becoming inappropriate. We don't need to involve everyone in private family matters. I nodded. You're right, I said. She relaxed slightly. And then I added, but you already did. That was the moment something broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. Jason pushed his chair back slightly. This is ridiculous, he said. You signed the documents. That's all that matters. I met his gaze. Is it? I asked. He stared at me. Yes, he said. I reached forward and gently tapped the paper with my finger. Then I suppose you won't mind if those documents are reviewed in full context. Lauren's eyes snapped to mine. "What does that mean?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at the pastor. "Reverend," I said politely, "you've been very kind to join us tonight. May I ask you something?" He seemed surprised but nodded. "Of course. In your experience," I continued, "would you consider it appropriate to ask someone, especially a parent, to sign away their home and financial independence under the condition that they leave? If they refuse, the room went still again. But this time the stillness was heavier. The pastor shifted slightly. "Well," he began carefully, "that would depend on the circumstances." "Of course," I said. "And if those circumstances involved pressure or an ultimatum?" He hesitated. "That would be concerning," he admitted. I nodded. "Thank you." Jason's face had gone pale. "Mom, stop," he said sharply. But I didn't look at him. Not yet. Because I wasn't finished. I turned to one of Jason's business associates. "You work closely with Jason, don't you?" I asked. He nodded cautiously. "Yes. In your field," I continued, "how are agreements viewed when one party is placed under pressure to sign immediately?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Well, generally that raises questions about validity." Questions I repeated softly. Lauren stood up suddenly. "That's enough," she said. "This is completely inappropriate." I looked at her. "For who?" I asked. Her jaw tightened. "For all of us." I nodded slowly. "I agree," I said. "It is inappropriate." Then I turned back to Jason. But it didn't start with me. That was the moment his control slipped entirely. "You're twisting this," he said, his voice rising. "You're making it sound like we forced you." I held his gaze. "You did," I said. "No, we didn't. You told me to sign or leave." His mouth opened, then closed, because there was nothing he could say that would undo that sentence. Not now, not here, not with everyone listening. The silence that followed wasn't uncertain anymore. It was decided. Lauren looked around the room, her confidence gone, now replaced by something sharper, fear maybe, or calculation shifting too quickly to stabilize. "This is being blown out of proportion," she said. "We were trying to help." I stood slowly, not abruptly, not aggressively, just enough to change the dynamic. "You weren't helping," I said quietly. I looked at Jason. "You were taking." The words landed with a finality that couldn't be softened, and for the first time that night, he had no response. None at all. Because the performance was over, and the truth had already been heard. The silence didn't break all at once. It fractured. Small, uneasy movements. A chair scraping softly. A glass being set down a little too hard. The kind of sounds people make when they're trying to behave normally in a situation that no longer is. Jason stood there staring at me, his chest rising and falling a little faster than before. Lauren didn't sit back down. She remained standing beside him, her posture rigid, her mind clearly racing, trying to find a way to regain control of a situation that had slipped out of her hands. But control once exposed doesn't come back easily, especially not in a room full of witnesses. "Christine," she said finally, her voice tight but composed. "I think we need to end this conversation." I looked at her. "You're right," I said calmly. "We do." For a brief second, relief flickered across her face. And then the front door opened. No one had knocked. The sound echoed through the house, clear, unexpected, and impossible to ignore. Jason turned sharply. What the footsteps followed. Measured, unhurried, familiar. Michael Turner stepped into the dining room. He didn't rush. He didn't apologize for entering. He simply walked in as though he belonged there because in a way he did. His eyes moved across the room, taking in everything with quiet precision. The guests, the table, the documents, and finally, me. "Christine," he said with a small nod. "Michael," I replied. Jason's confusion turned to irritation almost instantly. "What is he doing here?" he demanded. Michael turned to him, his expression neutral. "I was invited," he said. Lauren stepped forward. "No, you weren't." Michael didn't argue. He simply reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin folder. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding regarding that," he said calmly. Jason scoffed. "This is a private dinner." Michael's gaze didn't waver. And yet he replied a legal document was just executed in front of multiple witnesses. That stopped him. Because now this wasn't just a family conversation anymore. It was something else. Something formal. Something real. Lauren crossed her arms. "Whatever you think this is," she said, "it's already been handled." Christine signed the agreement. Michael nodded slightly. "Yes," he said. "She did." Jason let out a breath of frustration. "Then we're done here," he said. Michael's eyes moved to the document on the table. "Not quite." The room tightened again. Not with confusion this time. With anticipation. Jason's voice sharpened. "What do you mean, not quite?" Michael stepped closer to the table, his movements calm, deliberate. "Mr. Ellis," he said, "do you understand the conditions under which that document was signed?" Jason frowned. "What conditions?" Michael glanced at me briefly, just long enough to confirm. Then he looked back at Jason. "The condition that your mother sign or be removed from the residence." Jason's jaw tightened. "That's not what this is," he said quickly. Michael raised an eyebrow. "Then perhaps you'd like to clarify," he replied. Jason hesitated. Just for a moment. But it was enough. Lauren stepped in immediately. "This is being completely misrepresented," she said. "We were discussing options. That's all." Michael nodded slowly. "Options that included immediate relocation upon refusal." Lauren's voice faltered just slightly. "That's not—" "You told me to leave?" I said quietly. The room went still again. Not because the words were new, but because now they carried weight. Legal weight. Michael placed his folder on the table and opened it. Inside were copies of documents, official ones. Recognizable. Binding. The Ellis Family Trust. He said, his voice steady, contained specific provisions regarding coercion, undue influence, and the misuse of authority in relation to its primary holder. Jason's face paled. "What are you talking about?" he said. Michael met his gaze. "I'm talking about the clause your father insisted on," he replied. Lauren's expression tightened. "What clause?" she asked. Michael turned slightly, ensuring everyone in the room could hear him clearly. "In the event that any beneficiary attempts to obtain control of trust assets through pressure manipulation or misrepresentation of the primary holder's capacity." He paused, then finished. "Their access to those assets is immediately suspended pending investigation." The words landed like a verdict. Jason stared at him. "That's not—" he started. "It is," Michael said calmly. Lauren shook her head. "No, that doesn't apply here." Michael looked at her. "Doesn't it?" Silence. Because now everything that had been said, every word, every tone, every implication was no longer just uncomfortable. It was evidence. Jason stepped forward. You can't just come in here and make accusations, he said. I'm not making accusations, Michael replied. I'm outlining consequences. Jason's voice rose. She signed the document. Michael nodded. Yes, he said. She did. And that means... It means... Michael interrupted gently that we now have a record. Jason stopped. A record of what he asked. Michael's eyes moved across the room. To put it simply, he said a record of how that signature was obtained. The realization hit slowly, like a crack spreading through glass. Lauren's confidence vanished first, then Jason's, because now they understood. The signature hadn't protected them, it had exposed them. That's not how this works, Jason said, his voice unsteady now. It is, Michael replied. He turned to the guests. I apologize for involving you in this, he said politely, but your presence here is significant. One of the business associates shifted uncomfortably. What exactly are you saying? He asked. Michael didn't hesitate. I'm saying, he replied, that you've just witnessed a legal threshold being crossed. The pastor's face tightened. Chloe looked between Jason and Lauren, her expression no longer amused but calculating. Lauren shook her head again. This is insane, she said. You're twisting everything. Michael closed his folder. No, he said calmly. I'm clarifying it. Jason ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly now. This is ridiculous, he said. You're trying to turn a family decision into some kind of legal issue. Michael watched him carefully. It became a legal issue the moment pressure replaced consent, he said. Jason stopped pacing. His eyes flicked to me, then back to Michael. What happens now? He asked. The question came out quieter, less certain. Michael didn't rush his answer. Now, he said, the trust's protective provisions are activated. Lauren's voice sharpened. What does that mean? Michael looked at her directly. It means, he said, that all access to trust-controlled assets under Mr. Ellis's authority is temporarily suspended. Jason's face went completely still. Suspended? He repeated. Yes. For how long, Michael's expression didn't change. Until a full review is completed. Jason let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You can't be serious. Michael held his gaze. I am. Lauren stepped forward, her voice rising. This is our livelihood you're talking about. Michael nodded once. And your actions tonight have put it at risk. The room felt smaller now. Heavier. Jason looked at me again. Really looked this time. Not as an obstacle, not as a problem to solve, but as something he no longer understood. You did this, he said. I met his eyes. No, I replied quietly. You did. And for the first time that night, he believed it. No one stayed much longer after that. The dinner didn't end, it dissolved. Quiet excuses replaced conversation. Coats were gathered a little too quickly. Hands were shaken without eye contact. One by one, the guests slipped out of the house carrying with them the version of the evening they had just witnessed. Not the one Lauren had planned. The real one. By the time the front door closed for the last time, the house felt hollow. The candles were still burning, the table still set, but the illusion was gone. Only the truth remained. Lauren was the first to move. She turned toward Michael, her voice sharp, stripped of all politeness now. You need to leave. Michael didn't argue. He simply nodded. I will, he said. Christine. I stood. I'll walk you out. Jason didn't stop us. He just stood there, his face pale, his eyes unfocused like he was trying to process too many things at once and couldn't hold on to any of them. At the door, Michael paused. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. He studied me for a moment. "You handled that exactly right." I let out a small breath. "It didn't feel like winning. It wasn't," he said. "It was necessary." That distinction stayed with me as he left. Necessary, not satisfying, not joyful, just required. I closed the door and turned back. Jason and Lauren were still in the dining room, waiting. The air between us had changed completely. No more performance, no more careful language. Just confrontation. "What the hell was that?" Jason demanded the moment I stepped back into the room. His voice was louder now, rougher. The control he had tried to maintain earlier was gone. I didn't raise my voice. It was the truth I said. Lauren let out a sharp laugh. The truth, she snapped. "You humiliated us in front of everyone." I met her gaze. "No," I said. "You did that yourselves." Her expression hardened. "That's not what happened. You told me to sign or leave," I replied calmly. Jason ran a hand through his hair again, pacing now. "That's not what I meant," he said. I watched him. "Then what did you mean?" He stopped, opened his mouth, closed it, because there was no version of that sentence that sounded better once it had been said out loud. Lauren stepped forward, taking control again. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You're twisting everything into some kind of legal drama." I tilted my head slightly. "It became a legal issue the moment you made it one." Her eyes narrowed. "We were trying to manage the situation." "No," I said. "You were trying to control it." The word landed hard. Jason looked at me, something like anger and something else flickering across his face. "You think we're the villains here," he said. I didn't answer right away, because this wasn't about what I thought. It was about what they had done. "I think I said slowly that you made a decision, and now you don't like the consequences." Lauren scoffed. "Consequences," she said. "You just froze our access to everything." I didn't freeze anything, I replied. The trust did. Jason let out a frustrated breath. "This is insane," he said. "You're blowing this out of proportion." I looked at him. "Am I?" "Yes," he said. "This was just paperwork. Paperwork that removed my rights. It was temporary. It was permanent," I said. Silence. Because he knew I was right. I stepped closer to the table, placing my hand lightly on the back of a chair. "You didn't ask me," I continued. "You didn't explain it to me. You didn't even give me a real choice." Jason's voice dropped. "You had a choice." I shook my head. "No," I said. "You gave me an ultimatum." Lauren's patience snapped. "Oh, come on," she said. "You're acting like we were throwing you out on the street." I turned to her. "Weren't you?" Her mouth opened, then closed. Because again, there was no better version of the truth. Jason stepped between us slightly, his frustration boiling over now. "Enough," he said. "This isn't helping anything." "No," I agreed. "It isn't." I straightened, meeting his eyes fully. "But it's necessary." That word again. Necessary. He stared at me. "You've just destroyed everything he said." I felt something shift inside me, not guilt. Clarity. "No," I said quietly. "I didn't." "Yes, you did," he insisted. "Our accounts are frozen," Our business? Your business, I corrected. He stopped. What? Your business. I repeated. The one you expanded without telling me. The one you used my name to secure funding for. His face went still. How do you... I know I said. Lauren's expression changed instantly. Sharp. Alert. What does that mean? She asked. I looked at her. It means I said that this isn't the first line you crossed. Jason took a step back. That's not... You used my name, I continued, without my full consent. You tied my assets to your risk. That's not how it works. It is, I said, and we both knew it. Lauren looked at Jason, her composure cracking for the first time. You said everything was covered, she said. It is, he snapped. Or it was until this. He gestured toward me, toward the entire situation. I didn't flinch. Until the truth was visible, I said. Jason laughed bitterly. The truth, he said. You think this is about truth? I held his gaze. I think it's about responsibility. His expression twisted. You're my mother, he said. Yes, I replied. Then act like it. The words hit harder than anything else he had said that night, because they carried expectation, entitlement, a belief that being his mother meant accepting whatever he chose to do. I took a slow breath. I am acting like your mother, I said. He frowned. How? By not letting you destroy everything your father built. Silence. Real silence this time. Because Robert's name still mattered. Even now. Even here. Jason looked away first. Lauren didn't. She stared at me. Her eyes sharp, calculating again, but different now. More careful. More aware. This isn't over, she said. I nodded. I know. Jason looked back at me. What happens now? He asked. The question came out quieter, less certain. I considered it for a moment. Then I answered honestly. Now I said we deal with what you've done. No anger, no drama, just truth. And for the first time since this began, they understood something they hadn't before. They weren't in control anymore. The house didn't feel like a home anymore. Not that night. Not after everything had been said out loud. Jason and Lauren stayed in the dining room long after I went upstairs. I could hear their voices through the floor low at first, then sharper, then breaking into fragments that didn't quite form full sentences anymore. Blame travels fast when control disappears. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, my hands resting quietly in my lap, listening without trying to understand every word. I didn't need to. I already knew what they were arguing about, not whether they had crossed the line, but who was responsible for it. At some point the voices stopped. A door slammed. Then silence. Real silence this time. Heavy. Unavoidable. I lay down without turning on the light, staring at the ceiling as the events of the evening replayed themselves not as chaos but as clarity. Every moment had unfolded exactly as it needed to. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but truthfully, and that mattered more than anything else. The next morning I woke up to the sound of quiet movement downstairs, not the usual rhythm of coffee brewing and cabinets opening, something softer, more cautious. I got dressed slowly, deliberately, then made my way downstairs. Jason was in the kitchen, alone. He looked up when he saw me, his expression guarded like he wasn't sure which version of me he was going to face. I kept my voice even. Good morning. He hesitated. Morning. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he gestured vaguely toward the coffee maker. "Do you want some?" It was such a small question, so ordinary, and yet it carried more weight than anything he had said the night before. "Yes," I replied. He poured a cup and set it on the counter, not quite meeting my eyes as he did. "Thanks," I said. We stood there in silence for a few seconds, the kind that isn't comfortable but isn't explosive either. Just uncertain. Jason broke it first. "I spoke to the bank," he said. I nodded. "I assumed you would." He ran a hand over the back of his neck. "They've restricted access," he said. "Everything connected to the trust." "I know." He looked at me then, frustration flickering beneath the surface. "This is going to affect more than just us," he said. "There are employees, contracts, people depending on that money." I took a sip of coffee before answering. "Then you should have thought about that before putting it at risk." His jaw tightened. "I didn't put it at risk," he said. "You did." I met his gaze. "No," I said calmly. "I exposed it. The distinction landed between us sharp and undeniable." Jason looked away first. "You could have handled this differently," he muttered. "How?" I asked. He didn't answer, because there wasn't a version of this where I stayed silent that didn't end with me losing everything. We both knew that now. Lauren didn't come downstairs. Not that morning. Not even when Sophie left for school. I saw her briefly in the hallway, eyes red, expression tight, but she didn't speak to me, just walked past like I wasn't there. That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't over, but the dynamic had shifted. They weren't pushing anymore. They were reacting. By midday, my phone rang. It was Michael. "I've initiated the formal review," he said without preamble. "How long will it take?" I asked. "A few days for the preliminary assessment," he replied. "Longer for anything final." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "And Jason?" I asked. "He's already been contacted," Michael said. "They'll be requesting documentation, financial records, communications." I exhaled slowly. "He won't like that." "No," Michael agreed. "He won't." There was a pause. "Christine," he added, his voice softer now. "I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Are you safe there?" The question caught me off guard, not because I hadn't considered it, but because I hadn't needed to. "Yes," I said. "They're angry, but they're not." "That. Good," he replied. "Still, I think it would be wise to prepare for a transition. I've been thinking the same thing. There's a property under the trust," he said. "A small cottage by the river. It's been maintained but unused." I remembered it immediately. Robert had loved that place. "It's available?" I asked. "It is," Michael said, "and it's fully within your rights to stay there." I felt something settle in my chest. Not relief, not exactly, more like direction. "I'll go tomorrow," I said. "That's a good idea." After we hung up, I stood in the living room for a long time looking around the house, at the furniture, the walls, the life that had unfolded here without me truly being part of it. This had never been my home. Not really. I had just convinced myself it could be. That afternoon, Sophie came back from school earlier than usual. She found me in the kitchen packing a small bag. "Are you leaving?" she asked quietly. I turned to her. "Yes," I said. Her eyes widened slightly. Because of last night, I smiled gently. "Partly." She stepped closer. "Where are you going?" "To a place your grandfather used to love," I said. "It's quiet." Peaceful. She nodded slowly. Can I visit? The question softened something inside me. Of course you can, I said. She hesitated, then wrapped her arms around me. It was quick, tight, and honest. I'm sorry, she whispered. I held her gently. You didn't do anything wrong, I said. I know she replied, but she still sounded like she needed to hear it. When she pulled away, her eyes were wet but steady, stronger than she should have needed to be. Will you come back? She asked. I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to say it carefully. I'll always be here for you, I said. She nodded, and somehow that was enough. That evening, Jason found me by the front door. My bag was ready, my coat in my hand. You're really leaving, he said. It wasn't a question. No, I replied. I'm choosing to. He looked at me, something conflicted flickering across his face. You don't have to, he said. I tilted my head slightly. Don't I? He hesitated, then shook his head. That's not what I meant. I know I said. Silence stretched between us. Then he spoke again. This isn't how I thought things would go, he admitted. I studied him for a moment. Neither did I. He nodded slowly. Now what he asked. I opened the door. Now I said, stepping outside, you figure out what kind of man you want to be. I didn't wait for his response, because this part was his to face alone. The cottage by the river smelled like memory. Not the kind that overwhelms you, but the kind that waits quietly like it never left. When I unlocked the door, the hinges gave a soft, familiar creak. Dust had settled in the corners, and the air carried that faint stillness of a place untouched for too long. But beneath it, there was something else. Warmth. Robert had always loved this place. It reminds me of what matters he used to say whenever we came out here. No phones, no meetings, no rushing, just the sound of water moving slowly past the dock and the wind brushing through the trees. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. For the first time in months, I exhaled fully. Not cautiously, not carefully, just freely. I set my bag down and walked through the small space, the living room with its worn but comfortable furniture, the kitchen with its simple wooden cabinets, the bedroom where sunlight filtered through thin curtains and painted soft patterns on the floor. Nothing here was impressive, and yet everything here felt real. By the time I finished opening the windows and letting fresh air in, I realized something I hadn't expected. I didn't feel like I had lost anything. I felt like I had stepped out of something that no longer belonged to me. That distinction mattered, because loss carries weight. Freedom doesn't. The next morning I woke to the sound of water, not traffic, not distant conversations, just the quiet rhythm of the river moving past the dock. It grounded me, reminded me that life continued steady, indifferent to everything that had happened. And for the first time since Robert passed, I felt steady too. That feeling didn't last long, because reality has a way of catching up even in quiet places. My phone rang just after breakfast. Michael. They've responded, he said. I didn't ask who. I already knew. And I replied, they've agreed to a formal review meeting, he said. They want to resolve this before it escalates further. Of course they did. Control once threatened always tries to reassert itself. When I asked, tomorrow afternoon. I nodded. I'll be there. The meeting was held at Michael's office. Neutral ground, structured, controlled. Exactly the opposite of the dinner table where everything had unraveled. When I walked in, Jason and Lauren were already there, sitting side by side, but not close. That was the first thing I noticed, the space between them. Not large, but present. And telling. Jason looked tired, not physically but mentally, like the past few days had forced him to confront things he had spent a long time avoiding. Lauren looked different, still composed, still polished, but sharper, more guarded, like she was already preparing for a fight she wasn't sure she could win. Michael greeted me with a nod and gestured toward the chair across from them. I sat down. No greetings were exchanged. No small talk. There was no need for it. Michael began. We're here to address the events of the other evening and determine the appropriate course of action regarding the Ellis family trust. His tone was calm, professional, but firm. Jason shifted slightly in his seat. We're willing to resolve this, he said quickly. We don't want things to go further than they need to. I studied him. Then why did they go this far, I asked. He didn't answer. Lauren did. Because things needed to be handled, she said, and they weren't being handled efficiently. I looked at her. By me. She held my gaze. Yes, there it was. Still the same belief. Still the same justification. Michael intervened before I could respond. The issue isn't efficiency, he said. It's authority. He turned to Jason. You attempted to transfer control without proper consent. Jason shook his head. I didn't attempt anything he said. I was trying to streamline things. At your mother's expense? Michael replied. Jason's jaw tightened. That's not fair. It's accurate. Silence. Because accuracy is hard to argue with. Lauren leaned forward slightly. This doesn't have to become something bigger, she said. We can agree to revised terms, something that works for everyone. I watched her carefully. What does everyone mean? I asked. She hesitated, then answered. It means stability, she said. For the family. I nodded slowly. And what does that look like? She glanced at Jason briefly before continuing. Shared oversight, she said. Structured access. Clear boundaries. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. The same language. Repackaged. Refined. But unchanged. No, I said. The word landed simply, firmly. Jason looked at me. What do you mean, no? I mean no, I repeated. There won't be shared oversight. Lauren's expression hardened. Then what are you proposing? I leaned back slightly. Accountability, I said. Jason frowned. For what? I held his gaze. For everything. Michael nodded slightly. Specifically, he said we'll need to address the unauthorized use of trust-linked assets and the attempt to reassign control under pressure. Jason's face went still. That's being exaggerated, he said. No, I replied. It's being acknowledged. Lauren exhaled sharply. This is going nowhere, she said. I looked at her. You're right, I said. That caught her off guard. Because this isn't a negotiation. I continued. Jason blinked. It's not. No, I said. It's a consequence. Silence. Heavy. Final. I reached into my bag and placed a document on the table. Not the one they had given me. A new one. Prepared. Considered. Decided. What is this? Jason asked. A restructuring, I said. Lauren's eyes narrowed. Of what? Everything. Michael slid the document toward himself, scanning it quickly before nodding. "This aligns with the trust's provisions," he said. Jason looked between us. "You're serious?" he asked. I met his gaze. "Yes." Lauren leaned forward. "And what exactly does this restructuring involve?" I answered without hesitation. "Primary control remains with me," I said. "Permanently." Jason opened his mouth, but I continued. "Access to trust assets is restricted," I said, "until financial responsibility and compliance can be demonstrated over time." His expression shifted from frustration to something else, something quieter. "And me?" he asked. I held his gaze. "You don't lose everything I said." Lauren stiffened. "But you don't control anything either." The room went still, because that was the truth they hadn't expected. Not total loss, but not control. Something harder, something earned. Jason leaned back slowly. "And if I don't agree?" he asked. I didn't hesitate. "Then the review continues," I said, "and the outcome won't be yours to influence." Lauren looked at him sharply, but Jason didn't look back at her. He was looking at me, really looking this time, not as an obstacle, not as a resource, but as someone he had underestimated. And finally, understood. Jason didn't answer right away. He sat there staring at the document in front of him as if the words might rearrange themselves into something easier to accept if he waited long enough. They didn't. Lauren, on the other hand, reacted immediately. "This is unacceptable," she said, her voice sharp and controlled. "You can't just rewrite everything because you didn't like how one conversation went." I turned to her. "This isn't about one conversation," I said calmly. "It's about everything that led to it." She shook her head. "No, it's about control," she said. "You're taking it back because you don't trust us." I held her gaze. "You gave me a reason not to." Silence. Jason finally spoke. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" he said. The question came out quieter than before, less defensive, more uncertain. I looked at him. "Take responsibility," I said. He frowned slightly. "For what?" "For your choices," I replied. Lauren let out a short laugh. "This is unbelievable," she said. "You're acting like he committed some kind of crime." I didn't look at her. "Not a crime," I said. "A betrayal." That word landed harder than anything else I had said, because it wasn't legal. It was personal. Jason's expression shifted. Just slightly. "But enough." "That's not fair," he said. I nodded slowly. "You're right," I said. "It isn't." He blinked, caught off guard. "I trusted you," I continued. "I believed that when you said you'd take care of me, you meant it." "I did," he said quickly. "Then why did you try to take everything from me?" The question hung in the air. Simple, direct, impossible to deflect. Jason looked away. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lauren stepped in again. He didn't take anything she said. We were trying to manage things before they became a problem. I turned to her. "I wasn't the problem," I said. Her jaw tightened. "No," she replied. "You were the risk." The room went still. Even Michael shifted slightly in his seat. Because that was the truth. She hadn't meant to say out loud. I held her gaze. "A risk," I repeated. "Yes," she said, doubling down. "You're older. You're not as involved. Things change. And if something happened, You wanted control before anything happened, I interrupted. She didn't deny it, because now there was no point. Jason rubbed his face with both hands, his frustration turning inward. This isn't helping, he muttered. No, I said. It's clarifying. He looked at me again, and this time, something in his expression had shifted. Not anger, not defensiveness, something deeper, something heavier. You really think I was trying to hurt you? He said. It wasn't a question. It was a realization. I didn't answer right away, because the truth wasn't simple. I think I said slowly that you stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as something you needed to manage. He flinched. Just slightly, but it was there. That's not what I wanted, he said. But it's what you did. Silence. Lauren exhaled sharply. This is pointless, she said. We're going in circles. No, I replied. We're not. I turned back to Jason. This is the part where you decide what happens next. He frowned. I thought you already decided. I decided what I will accept, I said. You decide what you're willing to take responsibility for. He looked down at the document again, then back at me. And if I sign this, he asked. I met his gaze. Then you start rebuilding. Lauren's head snapped toward him. You're not actually considering this, she said. Jason didn't respond. Because for the first time since this began, he was thinking for himself. What does rebuilding even mean, he asked. It means you don't get control, I said. You earn trust. Lauren shook her head. This is insane, she said. You're treating him like a child. I looked at her. No, I said. I'm treating him like someone who made a choice. Jason let out a slow breath. And if I don't sign? He asked. I didn't hesitate. Then the review continues, I said. And you lose more than control. The words settled heavily, because now the stakes were clear, not vague, not implied, real. Lauren stepped closer to him, her voice low but urgent. Jason, don't do this, she said. This is exactly what she wants. He looked at her, and for the first time, there was distance in his eyes. What do you want? He asked her. The question caught her off guard. What do you mean I mean? He said, his voice steadier now. What's your end goal here? She blinked. Stability, she said quickly. Security. For us. For us, he repeated. She nodded. Yes. He looked back at me, then at the document, then back at her. And where does Mom fit into that? He asked. Lauren hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Jason saw it. I saw it. Everyone in that room saw it. She fits, Lauren said quickly. Of course she does. But the answer had already come too late. Jason leaned back in his chair, and something inside him shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. I need a minute, he said. Michael nodded. Take it. Jason stood and walked toward the window, his back to the room. Lauren watched him, her expression tightening. Jason, she said quietly. He didn't turn around. Just give me a minute, he repeated. The room fell silent again, but this silence was different. Not tense, not uncertain, transitional, because something was changing, slowly, but undeniably. After a moment, Jason spoke again, still facing away. I didn't think it would go this far, he said. I didn't respond. He wasn't talking to me. Not yet. I thought we were just getting ahead of things, he continued. Making it easier. Lauren stepped closer. That's exactly what we were doing, she said. Jason shook his head. No, he said quietly. That's what we told ourselves. He turned then and looked at me. Really looked. I crossed a line, he said. The words were simple, but they mattered because they were his. Not prompted, not forced, chosen. Lauren stared at him. Jason. He raised a hand slightly. Just stop, he said. She went silent. He walked back to the table, picked up the document, and looked at it for a long moment. Then he reached for the pen, and for the first time since that dinner, he wasn't being told to sign. He was choosing to. Jason didn't rush the signature. He held the pen for a moment, turning it slowly between his fingers the same way I had done that night at the dinner table. But this time the room felt different. There were no guests, no soft music masking tension, no illusion of celebration. Only truth. Only consequence. And choice. Lauren watched him closely, her expression tightening with every second that passed. Jason, she said, her voice low but urgent. Think about what you're doing. He didn't look at her. I am, he replied. No, you're not, she insisted. You're reacting. That's what she wants. I didn't respond, because this wasn't about me anymore. Jason took a breath, then another, and then he looked at Lauren, not defensively, not apologetically, clearly. That's the problem, he said. She blinked. What is, I don't know what I want anymore, he said. I only know what we've been trying to do. Her expression hardened. We've been trying to protect our future, she said. At whose cost, he asked. She hesitated, then recovered quickly. For us, she said again. For our family. Jason nodded slowly. But you never said how Mom fits into that, he replied. Lauren's jaw tightened. I already told you. No, he interrupted gently. You avoided it. The room went still. Michael didn't speak. Neither did I. Because this wasn't our moment. It was theirs. Lauren straightened her composure, sharpening again. She's being emotional, she said. That's what this is about. She's reacting, and now you are too. Jason looked at her. Am I? Yes, she said firmly. You're letting this spiral into something it doesn't need to be. He studied her for a long moment, then shook his head. No, he said quietly. I think I've been letting it go in the wrong direction for a long time. That was the moment something in Lauren broke. Not outwardly, not dramatically, but internally. I could see it in the way her shoulders stiffened, in the way her eyes sharpened. Control was slipping, and she knew it. So what she said, you're just going to hand everything back. After everything we've worked for. Jason's expression didn't change. We didn't work for it, he said. Her voice rose slightly. Yes, we did. No, he repeated. We positioned ourselves for it. The distinction hit hard. Lauren's lips parted, but no words came out immediately, because she understood exactly what he meant. And so did I. Jason looked down at the document again, then at the pen in his hand. I thought if we just move things into place early, he continued, it would be easier later. He let out a quiet breath. But that's not what this was. No one interrupted him, because now he was finally saying what had been unspoken all along. This was about control, he said. Lauren shook her head. No, she said quickly, It was about stability. For us, Jason replied. Not for her. Silence. Because again, there was no better version of that truth. He looked at me then, and for the first time since Robert died, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Not confidence, not ambition, humility. I'm sorry, he said. The words were quiet, but they carried weight. Real weight. Not the kind people say to end a conversation, the kind they say when they finally understand what they've done. I didn't respond right away, not because I didn't hear him, but because I needed to feel whether it was real. And it was. That didn't erase anything, but it mattered. Lauren stepped back slightly, her voice colder now. So that's it, she said. You're just going to let her take everything back. Jason didn't look at her. She didn't take anything he said. She kept what was already hers. Lauren's expression hardened further. And what about us? She asked. He finally turned to her. We figure it out, he said. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one. She stared at him, then at the document, then back at me, and for the first time, she looked uncertain, not defeated, not yet, but no longer in control. Jason lowered the pen to the paper. His hand didn't shake. His posture didn't shift. He simply signed, Jason Ellis, clean, clear, final. The sound of the pen lifting from the page echoed louder than it should have, because this time the signature meant something different. Not control, not entitlement, accountability. He set the pen down slowly, then leaned back in his chair. It was done. Michael reached forward, reviewing the document briefly before nodding. This formalizes the restructuring, he said. It will be submitted for processing immediately. Jason nodded once. Okay. No resistance. No argument. Just acceptance. Lauren looked at him, disbelief written clearly across her face. You're really doing this, she said. He met her gaze. Yes. Her expression shifted again, this time toward something sharper, something colder. You're making a mistake, she said. Maybe he replied, but it's mine to make. That ended it, not with a fight, not with a dramatic exit, just distance, the kind that doesn't close easily. Lauren didn't say anything else. She simply picked up her bag and walked out of the room. The door closed behind her without a sound. Jason didn't follow. He stayed where he was, looking down at his hands, at the space where the pen had been, at everything that had just changed. I stood slowly, not to leave. Not yet. But to shift the moment. You did the right thing, I said quietly. He looked up. His expression wasn't relieved. It wasn't proud. It was heavy. I should have done it sooner, he said. I nodded. Yes, I replied. No comfort, no softening, just truth. Because this wasn't a moment to erase what had happened. It was a moment to recognize it. Fully. I don't expect you to forgive me, he added. I studied him for a moment. Good, I said. He blinked. What I don't, I continued. Because forgiveness isn't something you ask for once. Silence. It's something you build toward, I said. He nodded slowly. I understand. And for the first time, I believed him. Not completely. Not yet. But enough. Enough to see that something real had changed. And sometimes, that's where healing begins. A year has a way of softening edges, not erasing them, not pretending they weren't there, but rounding them just enough that you can hold the memory without it cutting you open every time. The cottage became my home, not overnight, not in some dramatic, life-changing moment. It happened quietly through small routines, morning coffee on the porch, evenings by the river, the steady rhythm of days that belonged entirely to me again. I didn't rush to fill the silence. For the first time in a long time, I let it exist. And in that silence, I found something I hadn't realized I had lost. Myself. I started volunteering again more regularly this time. Not just at the church kitchen, but at a local community center that worked with older adults. People who, like me, had spent most of their lives taking care of others, and were now trying to understand what it meant to take care of themselves. Some of them had stories that felt uncomfortably familiar, children who meant well until they didn't, decisions made for their benefit that slowly erased their independence, voices that were heard less and less until they stopped speaking altogether. I listened, and sometimes I spoke, not about Jason, not directly, but about boundaries, about dignity, about the quiet moment when you realize that love should never come with conditions that take pieces of you away. Those conversations mattered more than I expected, because they weren't just about helping others. They were about reminding myself why I had done what I did. Sophie visited often, more than I had hoped for. She would come by after school some days, her backpack dropped carelessly by the door as she wandered in, like the cottage had always been hers too. We didn't always talk about serious things. Most days it was simple. Homework at the kitchen table, walks by the river, laughter that felt easy again. But sometimes she would ask questions, careful ones. "Do you miss living there?" I would think about it, about the house, about the version of family I had believed in. And then I would answer honestly, "I miss what I thought it was I said once." She nodded, as if she understood more than she should have needed to. Jason came less often. At first, not at all. Then occasionally. Then consistently. Not in a way that felt forced, in a way that felt cautious, respectful. The first time he showed up at the cottage, he didn't knock right away. I saw him from the window standing by the path, hands in his pockets, like he wasn't sure he had the right to come closer. I opened the door. He looked up. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I replied. Neither of us moved for a moment. Then I stepped aside. "You can come in." He nodded. And did. That visit was short, awkward, careful. But it mattered, because he didn't ask for anything. He didn't try to fix anything. He just showed up. The next time he stayed longer, brought coffee, asked about Sophie, talked about work, not in the old way, not with big plans and confident projections, but honestly, about rebuilding, about starting smaller, about doing things the right way this time. I listened, not as someone responsible for solving his problems, but as someone willing to hear him try. That difference mattered. Over time, those visits became something else. Not easy, not what they used to be, but real. And real is stronger than easy. Lauren didn't come. Not once. I heard things, of course. From Jason, from Sophie. They separated a few months after the meeting. Not dramatically, not in some explosive ending. Just distance. The kind that had been there all along, finally acknowledged. I didn't celebrate that. There was no satisfaction in it. Only clarity. Some relationships aren't broken by one moment. They're revealed by it. The trust was restructured exactly as planned. Most of it secured for Sophie's future. a portion allocated to the community programs I had become part of, and a conditional segment set aside for Jason. Not as a gift, as a responsibility, something he would have to grow into, something he would have to earn. And he knew that, accepted it, didn't argue. That was how I knew the change was real, not perfect, not complete, but real. One afternoon, about a year after that dinner, I found myself sitting on the porch watching the river the same way Robert used to. The light was soft, the air still, peaceful in a way that didn't need to prove anything. Jason was there, sitting a few feet away, not speaking, just being present. After a while, he broke the silence. "I've been thinking about that night," he said. I didn't look at him. "So have I." He nodded. "I didn't realize how far I'd gone," he admitted. I let that sit for a moment. "Most people don't," I said, "until it's too late." I turned to him then. "It wasn't too late," I said. He looked at me. "You're here." That mattered, more than anything he could have said. He nodded slowly. "I'm trying," he said. "I know." Silence again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It wasn't uncertain. It was enough. After a while, he spoke again. "Why did you smile?" he asked. I raised an eyebrow. That night, he clarified. "When I told you to sign." I thought about it, about the moment everything had shifted, about the weight of it, the clarity, the decision. "Because I knew something you didn't," I said. "What I looked out at the river, that I didn't need your permission to be respected." He didn't respond, but I felt the impact of the words settle, not as a lesson, as a truth, a simple one, but powerful, the kind that changes everything once you understand it. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking softly beneath me, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't think about what I had lost. I thought about what I had kept, my voice, my boundaries, my dignity, and the quiet strength it took to protect them, because in the end, I didn't ruin their night. I ended a lie. And sometimes, that's the only way to begin again. There comes a point in life, no matter your age, when you have to decide what you are willing to accept and what you are no longer willing to tolerate. For many of us, especially as women, we are taught that love means sacrifice, that being a good mother means giving even when it costs us our comfort, our voice, sometimes even our place in our own lives. But love should never require you to disappear. Respect should never be something you have to negotiate for. And family, real family, does not ask you to sign away your dignity in exchange for belonging. What happened to me wasn't just about money or property. It was about something deeper. It was about being seen or not seen, about whether my voice still mattered in a room where I had once been the foundation. And I learned something important. Standing up for yourself doesn't make you cruel. Setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish. And choosing your dignity over silence doesn't mean you've lost your family. It means you've finally chosen yourself. If you've ever been in a situation where you felt pressured, overlooked, or taken for granted by the people closest to you, I want you to know this. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to step away, and you are absolutely allowed to protect what you've built emotionally, financially, and spiritually. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? Where are you watching from today? If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your experience in the comments. Sometimes your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. You are not alone.